Hello and welcome to Being Who You Are, the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi Simpson, and I am delighted to welcome my guest today. My guest is Dave Huff. Dave is my wonderful Body Talk practitioner, and Talk is a wonderful healing modality. Dave is actively involved with the International Body Talk Association. He teaches a self-care class, which I've taken, called Body Talk Access, which is great, and I use it every day, and has been active formally in the healing world for around 17 years. And before this, he was a former corporate executive and bartender, going down a totally different path. So I, for one, am very grateful that he found the healing path, because that is where I have met him. So welcome, Dave. Thank you for agreeing to join me today for an interesting, what hopefully will be an interesting conversation.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well. So I usually begin by asking my guests, since what we're exploring is living in integrity and living authentically, what does it mean to you to be true to yourself?
So when I hear that question, I get stuck, particularly on the word yourself. So I get taken into, so who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But there's my ego self,
Mm-hmm.
and there'd be what some people would refer to as my higher self.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm being true, am I being true to my higher self? Am I being true to my physical self? Um, so it gets to be a little bit of a tricky question for an intellect like me.
Okay.
And so one of the, I'm going to get a little bit philosophical for a second. Okay, so feel free to rein me in. So there's to me, there's a great convergence that's taking place at the moment between science, philosophy, and religion. Ultimately, they're all pointing to the same thing.
Right.
So from the context of being true to myself, so it's pretty easy to see that you and I are two separate beings, two separate individuals. But if we look at the body as being a collection of cells, and these cells being made up of chemicals, the chemicals being made up of atoms, the atoms being made up of quantum materials, then down at that level that we seemingly know very little about, we're connected.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of myself, I think of myself as a vibrational being. So am I being true to my vibrational being leads me to, well, what does a vibrational being mean? And without hopefully offending anybody, I'm a spark of God.
Mm-hmm.
Or a spark of whatever. And if I take that a step further, then that if I'm created in that image of whatever God is, then by definition I have to be perfect, even though I'm seemingly imperfect in my life. I'm just uh, rediscovering this little spark that I actually am. So I can't not ever be true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Every action that I take is a learning experience, and if I get caught up in the you're you and I'm me and we're completely separate, then that's when I start getting into a whole bunch of I come from a place of guilt and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And get into actions like trying to control situations, judging myself, judging others, being inhibited in how I act. So what does it mean to me to be true to myself? Really, it means I continue to learn from every opportunity, would be the short answer.
Okay. I appreciate that answer. And I think like that to me speaks to the concept. And I think it's Tibetan Buddhism that says it, that things are perfect exactly as they are, right? Because we're learning what we need to in exactly this moment that we need to. Are you familiar with the work of Byron Katie?
Yep.
That again, it's that whole questioning, like it's accepting where we are as exactly where we need to be and learning exactly what we need to. Is that sort of what you're saying?
It is. It is. I look at life as a series of dots.
Mm-hmm.
Like every experience is like a dot, and really, it's up to me to decide what happens when I do the different dots connect. How do they connect? What's the pattern? What's in there for me to learn from? And I find it kind of funny how everything seems to go in a circle. Oh yeah, I've dealt with that. That's done. It's in the past, no more. And then all of a sudden something happens and I realize I'm not really done with it yet. Now
Absolutely.
there's good examples of that, and like what we would think of as healthy examples and what we would think of as uncomfortable examples, but they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 90s, I used to go to a meditation group that was based on the channeling of Cryon.
Okay.
And so that was cool. I didn't, back then I didn't really get it quite so much. Uh, it came, it went, and then 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden, I'm looking at something else, and doesn't some Cryon channeling wind up in that little sidebar on whatever I was looking at and YouTube, and doesn't it fit I happened to click on it just to see what it was about because I remember that. Yeah, that's kind of fun. And doesn't it happen to answer a whole bunch of questions? And I watched one last night, as a matter of fact, and it was very much about our whole purpose here is just to be. We all
Just
want to know what our path is. We want to know, how do I do this? How do I do this? And he goes, you just be.
right.
It's all about learning. So being true to myself is learning. I make tons of mistakes. I make tons of judgments. But am I learning from them? Am I learning different perspectives? Am I continuing to grow? All that fun kind of stuff.
Well, and you make tons of mistakes because you're human. That's part of the journey we signed up for here, is to experience this world through our sensory beings. And yeah, I think I love the fact that you talked about this, like the circular aspect of learning, and how I know that's been my experience. And in the past, I've been very judgmental about it and thought like, I should be done by this. I've already learned this lesson. Why is this coming back? And I think for me, I've realized more and more that there's just deeper layers to get into, and there's more to sort of shed. And as you said, your recent experience with this like serendipity of the Cryon learnings is that it's part of it is surrendering to what is and just accepting this is the lesson for me now, not resisting it, just going with it and allowing it to come.
That's a big part. Another aspect of that circling around piece is your wisdom has changed from when you dealt with it the first time.
Yeah.
So pieces that we haven't truly, we as I say, we often think we've dealt with something, but we've taken it down, de-escalated it to the point where we cope, we move forward. But there's still little sticky feet buried down in the cellular memory. And when it first comes up, maybe we see it from the angle where we catch this one. Then the next time it comes around, our perspective's different, and there's a different hook that we get. And each one of these hooks, like every memory, cross-references every other memory, helps us decide what's safe, what's not safe,
Right. Yeah.
and on and on and on and on.
Ad infinitum, right? It's yeah, it's Interesting. I love that you describe yourself as a spark of God. I think that's not offensive at all. I think that's remembering our connection to the divine. And to go back to the original question, I probably should rephrase that and say it's living true to yourself. It's not the small s self, it's the capital S self, which is really living true to your divine nature. That, and in fact, maybe I should change the question. So coming from an area like your background as a corporate executive, did you feel at that time you were living true to your divine nature? I mean, your path has been completely divergent from that. So to me, it sounds like a fork in the road happened at some point there.
So growing up right through my 40s, even though I've got a degree in psychology, I really had no concept of the idea of higher self. I was a see it to believe it. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D kind of person.
Okay.
But so going back in hindsight again, everything that ever happened had to have happened for a reason, whether I understood it or not. And again, I'm reflecting back, but to have judged myself would not really have been being true to myself.
Okay.
But I judge myself greatly.
I think we all do. Yeah.
As do all of us. But again, so everything that happened, I used to look at with a whole lot of judgment, and I tried to control everything. And I was worried about how did I look and all of this, like kind of stuff that everybody gets caught up in. And now it's I just kind of look at it as it is. Okay, so this is the situation. It doesn't change the fact that I want to, I do my own research rather than just blindly believe what many sources would have me believe.
Right.
But I don't, it's not from that same place of control that I was in before.
Okay.
So before it would be, I'm right, everyone else is wrong because I know better. Or well, this is my opinion, and we got to make sure that I persuade everyone else my opinion is right, or it's up to them to persuade me that they're right. So it's a one or the other, as an either or, as opposed to a this and.
Right. It's a zero-sum game. Like one person is right, one person is wrong.
Can you ask the question again? Because I think I circled around it but didn't answer it.
Well, more just so what led you from life as a corporate executive to be working and teaching as a healer? Like that's a complete 180. What took you down that path? And how did you,
Synchronicities.
Okay.
Which many people think of as just being coincidences. This is what I was referring to as just different dots. So I was becoming a pretty big wig within the corporate world, and in the 90s, it was like takeover mania. Companies were just taking each other over all of the time, and I was getting swept up the ladder. And while that was happening, my wife at the time was going through the opposite experience. She went from a VP type level down to almost an entry level within the sales world, and just decided that this is completely stupid. Excuse me. I'm not going to have anything to do with it. So she reinvented herself as a massage therapist. She went back through the what color's your parachute kind of thing, and was very much a hands-on kind of person. That's what she wanted to do. So with the way she got funding to do it, and the program involved a considerable amount of networking.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people that she networked happened to be someone who called themselves a Body Talk Practitioner.
Okay.
Now, at that time, excuse me, at that time, I'd hit a takeover that was not good for me.
Uh-oh.
And so I'd wound up on the outside. I'd managed to get back into a much smaller company, much like she had, but at a lower level. And I realized that no matter what I did, there, I guess that one wasn't so much a lower level, but I realized no matter what I did, this company had a maximum 9 months left. It wasn't going to change.
Okay.
There was really no saving. So at that time, she was becoming this massage therapist, doing this networking, and in the corporate life, it was pretty common for me to start working at 6:37 in the morning and not finish till 8 or 9 at night. And I came home this one day, and there's this book sitting on our coffee table called Body Talk Module 1 at the time. And I sat there and I picked it up and I just started flipping through it.
Right.
And I'm just going, this stuff makes way too much sense. Now, growing up, I always had really, really bad allergies. They were at the point where if I cut the grass, I'd be in bed for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
If it was green, I was probably alive. I was allergic to it. I used to have to take steroid drops for my eyes. Those stupid shots they put in your arms, they didn't do anything for me except make my arms swell. But anyway, so I read this manual. We were living in Barrie at the time, and I just so happened that for the first time in about 9 months, I could take a weekend off because I was still fighting like a dog trying to make things work. And it just so happened that for the first time ever, this class was being offered in Barrie.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no, other than flipping through the manual, I had no concept of what it was, but it was just, we'll call it an instinct.
Okay.
That, hey, I'm about to enter into the same pattern that my wife had gone through.
Mm-hmm.
I really want no part of that. I'm kind of fed up with this whole thing. Dots of the manual appeared. The dot of the class being in town appeared. The dot of me having the courage to say it's okay to put myself first, which wouldn't have been the way in the past. It was always sacrifice myself for the business, that kind of stuff. So I took the class.
Mm-hmm.
Literally taking the class on with the philosophy, well, I've spent $1,000 on stupider weekends. But let's fly to Atlantic City overnight. Let's just go away for this weekend. Let's just do this. Let's just do that. So I decided I had absolutely nothing to lose. So why not do this? And again, I'm still at that point very much a B C linear, see it to believe it
Yeah.
kind of.
Prove it to me kind of attitude.
So I go into this class, and probably the only way to word it is even on the first day, see miracles happen. There's this younger 20-something-year-old athletic therapist whose knees were completely shot. He couldn't bend down if his life depended on it. He winds up being a guinea pig for one of the techniques that we're learning here. All of a sudden, I guess I was working on him at the time because it's all very hands-on kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he jumps off of the table and he starts doing squats and going, this is amazing.
Oh, wow.
And so if you're in the class at that time, you kind of go, maybe there's something to this. Can't really explain it. Telling the body to hydrate itself a little bit different in the area of the knees kind of seems sort of silly, but apparently it worked for him.
Yeah.
And so anyway, after the second night, again, we'd been working on each other with these basic techniques from the system. And that night I go home and I actually, I'd been a guinea pig for the instructor towards the end of the day. And when I got up off of the table from her working on me, I didn't feel like my feet were touching the ground. It was like I was floating. And
Wow.
I was longer, a little bit lightheaded and stuff like that. Again, didn't really think too much, but I only lived 2 blocks away, so it was no big deal getting home. And that night, I sweat like a pig. And when I got up in the morning, there were all these brown spots all over my head, and I'm just going, "This is really weird."
Yeah.
I kind of look like a leopard, and go back into the class, and by the end of the day, those spots had all disappeared. And it wasn't until about a month or so later, because this would have been late April in 2004. And about a month later, my wife goes, "You realize you're not sneezing?"
Hmm.
I go, "You're right." And I go cut the grass. Nothing happens. And I'm like,
Wow.
this is really bizarre. So at that point, I decided there's really something to this stuff. And now there's another month of confirming that, the corporate world is done with me. I'm kind of done with the corporate world. I'm going to look at something else. So I just dove into this stuff uh, as deep and as fast as I could. Um, rather, it was a rather interesting transition as I went from a comfortable 6-digit salary down to making about 10,000 a year, and it didn't work very well for the marriage, but uh, that's how I got here.
Wow. That's such an amazing story and so interesting. I love how you describe the different events that led you. But it takes a lot of courage to actually trust those as well and act on them, because I think we can have the experience of, those things showing up in our life, like as you call them, serendipities or coincidence or whatever. And most of the time, I think we ignore them or dismiss them or don't really follow them. So it takes a lot of courage to actually say, okay, I'm going to pursue this because of the way everything seems to be lining up. And I certainly have experienced that myself, where you sort of feel like I can't ignore this. There's so many things that are leading me down this path. What
I
was, sorry, go ahead.
was going to say, th- those dots had always been there, but I hadn't recognized those
Yeah.
dots.
Yeah.
Like I was back in the 70s. That would have been the time when evangelists were just becoming popular on television. There
Hmm.
was the Jimmy Swaggart and Tammy Faye Baker
Oh yeah.
and all of that. And again, being the arrogant, judgmental person that I was at that time, I used to run around to people and put my finger on their forehead and go, "Yes, you've been saved." And but now, as I get a deeper understanding of the quantum world as it applies to healthcare, who knows what change I was actually affecting on people by doing that kind of stuff.
Unintended consequences, right? That's what that could have been. But so what was the reaction? You said it was hard on your marriage. You don't have to go into details there, but what was the reaction of like family and friends? I mean, that's a big shift to say, I'm in the corporate world, I'm making piles of money, and now I'm going to do something that very few people are familiar with. And it's energetic healing, which for a lot of people, that's pretty out there in the woo. Um, what was the reaction of the people around you?
Trying to remember. Um, Cautiously supportive. Let's
Nice.
let's let's put it that way. Um, there, it, everybody, family often has our best interest at heart.
Hmm.
Oh dear, you shouldn't really do that. Don't you think you should get a good job? I really think you should go back and get another job. Like, you've got responsibilities now. You should really be doing this.
Right.
So there was plenty of that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
but there was also probably a much deeper sense of conviction internally that I'd never really thought about until now, that it
Okay.
wouldn't have really mattered what anyone said, was I just knew that I was not going back to that corporate world. That
Right.
I'm done, 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 done.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but again, this comes back to the being true to yourself thing. That the one severance package that I got would have been, can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years salary, and it also would have had the option of including an executive coach to help
Okay.
me get back into the corporate world. So back then, that I could take the coaching, or I could take the $3,000.
Hmm.
3,000 was worth a little bit more back then,
Right.
and uh, I wanted to take the coaching because at the time it was all I knew was business.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to get back in. I better take the coaching, because by then I knew that 90% of the jobs come from who you know and networking and all of that kind of stuff. But um, wife at the time, again, very fear driven because of the money, and her upbringing was, no, we need the $3,000. Let's take the $3,000. You can find another job.
Okay.
So all of that still predated me taking that first class,
Hmm.
but it was, so would you say, it's hard to say, was I really being true to myself, saying, I should really take that coaching opportunity because that's going to keep me in the corporate world, or uh, but I said, okay, no, if the money's really that important to her, then we'll take that. I believe in myself enough that I'm going to get it. Maybe she was just smarter than I was. Thought that I was still going to get back in there anyway. But
Hmm.
again, at one of those mystery levels, I was being uh, guided to make sure that I didn't go back that way.
Right. And I think when your example of like not taking the money, and was that being true to yourself? That's an interesting question, because there are times in life where I think I can certainly look back and say, I really wanted things to go this way and they didn't. And now with hindsight, I could say, oh, I'm so glad I didn't get what I wished for then. And so was that like, you know, a higher guidance leading us to the outcome we needed? And I
So,
think maybe part of the lesson there is the learning how to trust and surrender.
so
And and that is part of being true to yourself, is to me is being able to learn to let go and not try to force and control everything.
So I would say that I was not being true to my egoic self,
Right.
but
Exactly.
like the, we've got three brains in the body that they know of, right?
Hmm.
So there's the brain in the head. There's literally 40,000 brain cells in the heart, and almost, I think it's 180,000 brain cells in the gut.
Hmm.
And um, this brain up here, its job is just to protect the physical body.
Hmm.
That's it. That's all. Everything it does is about, is it safe? Is it safe? Is it safe? And so, was I being true to that? No. Did I feel bad about that? No.
No.
So while I may not have been true to those fears and the individuality of me, at some level I was still being true to myself, even when I didn't know I was being true to myself.
Right. You.
Because back then, I I would have been reading things like the Celestine Prophecy and a few other things along that line. So I was already inching my way towards that.
Okay.
books kind of show up at the right times. And
Mm-hmm.
so it
Interesting.
is, it was, it will be.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Um, the one of the reasons that I want to have conversations like this about what it means to be, and when I, again, for me, it's the being true to your higher self or your higher purpose. And I understand what you're saying about the ways that like that it is, it will be, that speaks to that as well. But part of it is because I believe that the more each one of us can speak authentically, we are empowering others and inspiring them to do the same. Because my personal belief is that most people are not living authentically to themselves, to their higher self. They're not necessarily fulfilling their full purpose, or they're not attaining their complete fulfillment. They're not really showing all of the wonderful gifts that they have, because we've all been sort of drinking the Kool-Aid that you need to do this and tick this box and meet this person and buy this house and get this kind of job. And so I feel that the more we can inspire others to really look within and think, what light do I feel called to share with the world? We, then it just helps sort of lift everybody. And so that's a very long roundabout way to ask, do you feel that your ability to make this complete shift from, this successful corporate career into work as a healer, and being so involved in Body Talk as a modality, and teaching it and being active in the international body and everything, do you feel that expressing yourself uniquely in this way have you seen a ripple effect in your life where it's helped other people step into who they really are?
Oh, of course. Part of the question might be, like, I was making a difference in other people's lives in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but let me think of where I want to go with that question. We all intuitively or instinctually know when somebody's being authentic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if somebody's trying to justify something and convince, you just know, oh my God, will they quit trying to snow me or sell me? Or this person is so in their head, I can't stand it. Or you get the others where it's, oh, this will be so good for you. And they're trying to manipulate and control you. Um, but when somebody is coming from what most of us would think of as coming from their heart.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you're talking about when you say authentic.
Yes.
Are they coming from? Is this where they're coming from? I'm gonna take it a step deeper than that. And that, so this brain here, its job is just to defend the physical body. So I can make a lot of really bad decisions and feel really good about them. And like I can go out and drink myself. I go back in time, I would go out and I would drink myself silly and feel really good about drinking myself silly until the next day.
Right.
So was I being true to myself at that time? Yeah, it may not have been the best thing for me, but that is where my level of mental coherence was. So that
Mm-hmm.
vibe that I'm putting out, just with where it is mentally. So part of our vibe also comes from the heart. So it carries much more of an emotional quality to it, a wisdom quality to it. So I can still be authentic by saying, oh, I keep putting my heart out there and I keep on getting let down because I'm just coming from strictly from this level. So I'm being true to myself, I'm being authentic, but it still may not feel good to me as an individual, and I get stuck in those patterns. Or if I'm coming more from my gut, which is our instinctual brain,
Mm-hmm.
then when I'm coming from that instinctual place, then dots seem to appear and things become the opportunity for things to become a little bit easier occur. And if you get the vibe from each of those three centers, really working synchronistically, or I guess what they would call them being coherently, then it becomes even that much more powerful, and it opens a gateway to a DNA level of coherence. There's literally vibes that come out from that level that is what are actually being processed first, but the filters of the other three get in the way. But if I'm really coming from that place of true authenticity, that DNA level of coherence, I don't even think about what I'm doing. I just do it.
Right.
And so, and I guess a lot of times we think of that as being in the zone. And you can be in the zone no matter what we're doing. So I got together with a friend that I hadn't seen in close to 10 years the other day. And, we did the socially acceptable thing. So we met outside and we went for a walk down along the waterfront. And, but it was like time had stood still, and we were just, the way we were holding space. Every single person we passed on the path smiled at us and said, hello, how are you doing?
Right.
Whereas if I wasn't in that deep of a level of authenticity, which is I think all I'm saying is that there's levels of authenticity. And half of the people may have just walked by the way they always walk by it, but there was something about the way that I was resonating, even though I wasn't technically trying to make their life better. It just happens because I'm in a good space.
Okay.
When I'm in a good space, the people around me are in a good space. If I come somewhere, and I'm sure we've all known it, we go to somebody, meet somebody, and they're not in a good space, you know it.
Yeah.
And quite often you come out of there and you just go, ick, let's get that off of me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or if I'm in a so-so place and I go to somebody who's in a good place, I come out of there and I go, oh, I can't believe 3 hours just went by, and oh, do I ever feel good? So that being authentic happens all the time, and the making a change in people's life happens all of the time. Again, back to the corporate days, I was involved in various volunteer organizations, and there were people that made me look not very successful. And one of them goes to me, you've taught me a whole new way of leading people. And all I was doing was being myself, respecting the people that are working for me, giving them, or that are under, we'll call it working for me, even though it was a volunteer group, and giving them enough rope so that they could learn and they could do, as opposed to controlling and telling. So their vibe was increasing. Other people were noticing it. There were ripple effects. As they notice it, then they go home to their family differently, and the change is happening in their family differently. So it was happening before, it's happening now, it's just happening now in a different way.
Right.
It's much more immediate, and I'm better at noticing.
Okay. Yeah, because what you're describing is,
it.
it's like more of an energetic resonance that you're describing, and the ripple effect that's happening. It's almost an unconscious, like that. And it's a more immediate effect as well. I was, my question, I appreciate your answer, because my question, I was thinking more like, oh, did you inspire other people to do, make different choices? But you took it to the next level, which is just our way of being has an impact on the others around us, the other people that we come into contact to. And so it's so important to be mindful of the energy that we're putting out there, or just being aware that we are constantly putting energy out there, and it's being received in different ways. I mean, and as you described, like we all have had that experience of leaving a place and thinking like, oh, yuck. And we've also had the experience of being around someone who just made us feel so wonderful and really seen and understood or loved. And so it's so powerful. I'm glad yeah, that took it, you took it to a level beyond what I was looking for. So
So
thank you, Dave.
again, coming back to one of the things I was saying at the beginning with this convergence between science and philosophies, um, to me, it only makes sense that big things are made of little things.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at that hierarchy of a body being a bunch of individual cells, being a bunch of atoms, and then the atoms being electrons and protons, and then you get down into the subatomic particles. If we get down to that level where we're vibrating with a degree of awareness from there, then the potential for how that shows up in each of the higher or more dense levels is that much greater.
Mm-hmm.
If I simply come from my head of saying, oh yes, I understand your pain, that was a really bad relationship, well, let's think about this, maybe we should look for a person that isn't so controlling next time. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really change a person's vibe. And same as if I just come going, oh, I feel your pain, oh, it must be terrible, oh, poor you. That doesn't help so much. But when you get down underneath that surface and just go, well, it's a dot in your life. There's a lesson in there somewhere for you. It will be interesting to see what you actually learn out of it and where it leads to next.
Mm-hmm.
So take the judgment out of it. Just have that acceptance, that compassion. And you referred to the Buddhist stuff earlier, but to them, from what I've read when I was into Buddhism, compassion, compassion,
Mm-hmm.
compassion, compassion.
Yeah.
The stuff in Cryon the other day, the channeling, compassion. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going to be the split in society is compassion, not whether are you vaccinated or not vaccinated. It's
Right.
are you do you resonate with at that level of compassion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all, I mean, that it's the idea to me, compassion to me is just another word for love. And that's the most, obviously the most important power. And do we want to be resonating in that energy, the energy of love? Is that, can we bring love into all that we're doing?
Short answer is yes. The challenge is love is such an overused word.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just love you. Well,
Yeah.
we've known each other a week.
I
Uh,
love ice cream.
I love ice cream. Yeah, I love driving my car. I love um, so yes, absolutely. But I think in part it also depends on what you mean by the word.
Yeah.
Um, I did a fascinating years ago. I was very big. Like back up. Words carry energy, vibration,
Mm-hmm.
right? So light is kind of stillness, but sound gets everything moving. So there is great power in words.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a period where I was very much into the history of words, and it's fascinating when you look at what words actually mean versus the way that they're being used today.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody could be saying something and they think that they're giving off words of love and encouragement, but based on the history of the word, which is what the vibration is still based on, it's actually doing the opposite.
Okay. Can
So
you give an
anyway,
example of that or?
well, superficially, the generation below me. Oh man, that's sick, as in it's really
Oh,
good.
okay. Yeah.
Or, oh, that's so bad. When really what they mean is that it's good. So like those are really superficial
Yeah.
examples. But you can look up any word that you're hearing, and you'll just go, oh, I didn't realize that was meant disempowering. The other day, can't remember why. I was listening to something by Dr. Christian Northrup,
Mm-hmm.
and she went on to explain how Lucifer actually means light.
Okay.
And I'm going, really? I'd always just associated it with the devil.
Right.
And but as you become aware of what the original meaning of a word is, and it changes the vibration that that word has. Doreen Virtue has, she and her son put out a book called Angel Words,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where there's a whole science in that. I think it's somatics, but I can't remember. But they would they would catch the vibrations of a word,
Okay.
and then they would show its opposite. So they would show love, and then they would show hate, and you could just see like love would be nice and smooth, hate would be all
Right.
kind of stuff. So um, growing up, we had you probably had the same thing from your parents of careful of the company you keep.
Yeah.
Because we're picking up other people's vibes. And when they're feeling good, we feel good. When they're bad, we can be bad. So if you hang around with bad people, you become bad people, is the kind of philosophy of the
Mm-hmm.
day. So at a vibrational level, there was something to that.
Right.
Same with, well, you better watch the words that you're using.
Yeah.
And again, because words are actually physical down at that quantum level.
Mm-hmm.
So they have an impact on our DNA and on us.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we can all think of like big, words that have an immediate and very strong visceral response in most beings. So yeah, there's definitely lots of power in that. All right. Well, we're out of time because I'm trying to keep our discussions sort of under an hour. So I feel like I could talk to you for much, much longer and go down lots of different rabbit holes. But I'll have to pause for now and maybe we'll come back and reconnect over more topics down the road. Um, any last sort of questions or comments before we say goodbye and close off?
Best thing anybody can do in these times
Mm-hmm.
is connect with the earth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Um, the, the planet is alive. It
Mm-hmm.
gives off a frequency, and 10 minutes barefoot on the ground or walking through a bunch of trees, hugging an evergreen,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really matter what, but being connected with nature at that level, again, that's like the DNA level coherence, and it
Yeah.
has a ripple effect up through makes our instinct sharper, makes our compassion sharper, makes our thought processes sharper.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say that. I spend a great deal of time in nature and I recommend it to most of my clients, and most everybody I know. We are deeply connected to the earth. And I think it's so easy for people to feel disconnected. And it is so important to reconnect, fully experience it with all of our senses. And definitely, yeah, if you can do it barefoot, that's wonderful as well.
And for those that are in condos or in places where you can't do it, there's earthing mats, earthing sheets, all kind of earthing pillows, all kinds of earthing gadgets. I was amazed at how immediately I noticed the difference when I used them.
Wow. Okay. Cool. That's cool. Thanks for reminding me of the importance of that. Is I take it for granted because I do spend so much time in nature, but it's of critical importance for my overall well-being in every, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. So it's certainly a very important part of my life. Now, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so, or where can they find you?
My website would be matrixmastery.ca. So
Okay.
matrixmastery.ca. If they're in the greater Toronto area, I do my sessions out of the Borealis Naturopathic Wellness Center in Newmarket,
Great.
so they can reach me either of those ways. I refuse to be a slave of my phone anymore. I spent too many years that way. So if somebody were to find my phone number and call me, it could be a day before I get back to them because
Okay.
I check it a couple of times a day at best.
Okay.
But the website's got my email address, Dave@Matrix Mastery. So
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing this conversation with me. I appreciate it.
my
And
pleasure. It was fun. Glad you asked me to do it.
thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and looking forward to our next conversation.
All right. Everybody be well.
Thank you.